And we're going to get started because it is 4:45 and we want to be sensitive to your time. And I know a lot of you are probably coming right from your classrooms or still sitting in your classrooms. So welcome. My name is Dea Ore, and I am one of the authors and co-founders of Empowering Writers. And I'm joined today by my fabulous content team, Kathy Howell, Diane Lazar, and Jennifer Seaton. So the three of them are going to be jumping in to really share with you a lot about the resource and how we simplify this process for students. But I do want to tell you this. A Sentence a Day was really born out of the need of, we started it first in, actually, we didn't have the resource to begin with. And our second grade teachers kept saying, if our kids are coming to us and supposed to be writing, like starting to generate narrative story or write informational writing, how do we do that when they can't write a sentence? So we ended up backing up saying, you know what, that's a really good question. And one that we hadn't addressed at that point. So we really looked at what our students needed and backed up and took a look at, if we were kindergarten teachers, first grade teachers, what can we teach kids in just a sentence a day? Literally working through sentences on a daily basis. How can that consistent approach help build the foundation so that our students that are moving into second grade are able to really hit the ground running? So Sentence a Day was really developed for that. And then we started in K&1, and then we came up really with a grade 2 version as well. So let's just jump into the objectives for today. And we'll talk about a little bit about what we're going to cover in this really quick 45 minutes. We're going to introduce the Empowering Writers approach, just give you an overview of how we work. So that you understand. I see that there's a lot of you who have not seen the resources. I'm not sure whether or not you use our other Empowering Writers resources, but we'll give you a quick overview on that. We want you to understand the daily routine. So what's important about establishing that routine on a day-to-day basis, and what are those expectations? And I also want you to think from the teaching perspective to see how manageable it is when we really address it that way. And then the other part about that daily routine is that we really want you to keep in mind that it's never a one and done. When we're doing these lessons, it's always the foundational work. We're always building onto the next level. So whatever work we do initially, you're going to be revisiting it throughout your year. And then we want to address the foundational language skills and those genre connections. So why is this a sentence a day so important? What else can we be teaching students as we're teaching them sentence structure? And as you know, Empowering Writers, we're all about generating writing and having kids understand why we read and what we read. And that's why at this very young age, we already start to make those genre connections. Is it narrative? Is it expository informational? Is it opinion writing? These are opportunities for us to have those conversations in a brushstroke. So that's what we're going to look at today objectively. And at this point, I'm going to turn it over to my content team, and they're going to jump right into really the Empowering Writers approach.
Thanks, Dea. So what we want to start with really is, what is Sentence a Day? And Sentence a Day is a daily exercise that helps us to teach sentence structure, grammar, mechanics in a very predictable and engaging way. It's hands-on, it's fast-moving, it's 10 minutes of your day, a way that you could start by reminding students what those important skills are that they need in order to develop into the writing that we're looking at. So if you look at the left-hand side of your screen, you can see the resources that we offer. The first one, A Sentence a Day, is for primary grades. We do recommend this for your L's and for your resource students. If you want to do that, it is that basic approach, looking at the parts of the sentence, and we will look at that here in just a moment. You'll notice that the second resource is for grade 2. Once we enter the grade 2, we address that third objective Dea was talking about in terms of really making some connections to the genre writing itself. So we do a lot of identifying what the genre is and developing out the skills within that genre. The basic still remains with the sentence structure, the grammar and mechanics in order to put a sentence together. And then I'll also throw in here, we do have A Sentence a Day for grade 2 in Spanish, if that might be something that you're interested in. So as we begin to look at this resource, we open it up and look at the very first page, we see the introduction. And it is here where we really want to explain what happens in those 10 minutes. And so I've highlighted just a few of those pieces of what can happen, where students will, if you'll look underneath the first heading, in that 10 minutes a day, you're still teaching all throughout the day those same skills: sound symbol connections, how to put sounds together, how to recognize letters, all of the parts of teaching kids writing. So here it is how sentences are constructed, how to recognize the parts of a sentence, the subject and the predicate, while you're looking at those basic characteristics. So every story or every week you have a theme, and the story is read by you, the teacher, and it's just a very short segment. And you read that very short segment. We'll show you an example of that here in a little while. And then the short segment ends with a question. And it's very predictable in its response. And the response really inspires a very simple sentence. And so as the teacher, you model that sentence. Now I'm going to come back to what the teacher does in doing that so you can see exactly what we expect in terms of what you would point out and highlight as you're modeling or charting that sentence. Now, once that process is done, we'll come back to that in just a minute, then the students have the opportunity to write that same sentence on their paper. And they're going to go back and do exactly what the teacher did. Identify those sentence parts, look at the capitalization, look at the punctuation. At the end of the week, they work towards the rest of those story segments every day, the teacher modeling, and then Friday, they come up with their response. So part of that daily routine is as they're writing their response, the teacher's walking around the room and looking at the work. And it's just as simple as, if they get it correct, then the work is dotted. You place a small dot above that part of the sentence that they did well. If not, then you make a quick mark to show them how to do that correctly. So all of these things we want to give you an example of on the screen, as well as some additional ideas that we have. So let's look at that teacher part first and what those steps look like in terms of that lesson format. So as I just said, you're going to read the story segment. The story segment ends in a question. You as the teacher will chart that response, and you're always going to ask, how do I know it's a sentence? How do I know it's a sentence? So the students are going to point out the who part of the sentence, that subject, and the do part. And we're going to put a slash to show the separation between the subject and the predicate. Okay, so the other question, of course, is how does it begin? You want that response always with a capital. How does it end? With a period. And then you allow those students to write the sentence on their paper. So you can see I'm just reading very simply. The same process happens every single day. So they write the part on their paper, and then we bring in a color coding system. And so you've already identified all of these parts. Now it's up to them to identify the who part by underlining that part in red and identifying the doing part of the sentence in green. And then last, you can see number 6, they're going to trace the capital letter and the period in blue. So if you were to do this every single day with this kind of consistency, you're going to see students fall into this routine. You write, they annotate with color, and then you walk around and dot those elements that are correct. So let's look at what that is. So here's some student samples. We're looking at several different parts here. Now, this is not in color, so just a reminder, the I in the first sample would be underlined in red, the 8-4 cookies would be underlined in green, and the capital letter and the period would be traced in blue. Well, for this particular one, Charlotte, example is correct. And so the teacher dotted the capital I, dotted the slash to designate the subject versus the predicate, and then dotted the punctuation mark at the end. When you have a student that does not do that correctly, that's where we offer a correction. So our other example here, Charlotte made another attempt. I might want a playful puppy, might kind of threw her off here. And so you can see that the correction is simply marked with an arrow, where those that are correct are marked with a dot. So that's what we're looking at every day. That's basically the student product, Monday through Thursday. Now on Friday, you have a picture that goes along with that story set. You still read that short story segment, and then they're going to answer that response on their own. So they get a chance to write their very own sentence and come up with that. So you can have a student come up to the front of the room and write that, and then the rest of the students can do the same. And they're still going to go through the process of diagramming that sentence. So let's look at a week's worth of students' responses. And you can see here the color coding. It's very easy for you to see. And if you look closely, you can see the dots that are placed in those correct areas. And so I draw your attention maybe to number 3, as you can see that number 1 and 2, they capitalized I. Number 3, Clark was the name and also the beginning of the sentence and is not capitalized. So there's just simply a circle there. And so that's kind of your lead on what you do with that and how you follow up with that. But what we want to see is that consistency with this process is definitely key. So every day, same time, same routine, that's what's going to build a strong foundation of these skills that our authors need, and most importantly, the confidence for them to do that with. So at this point, let's stop for just a minute and see if there are any questions on the procedure that we work through, that routine that we use. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Diane, and she's going to show us how we could use the cards that come along with the book in a learning station.
But then someone asked if we focus on spelling.
So you're going to see in this set that Diane's about to do, there is some focus on patterns of words, and that's where you're going to see a lot of the spelling come out.
Thanks, Jen. Mm-hmm. So at Empowering Writers, there's always more, right? We always build in some layers. So what we want you to understand is that as you're doing this 10 minutes a day, and we're really building in that consistent work with kids, what do they do later on? And so one of the things that's really important is that they have additional time to practice, whether it be during your learning center time, perhaps it's for homework. There's plenty of opportunity during the day for students to continue to practice this kind of work. So notice right here that we've suggested that you create some learning centers. These are a series of word cards that come along with your whole sentence a day resource. Now, what you would do is photocopy those cards, place them in baggies. You can have individual baggies for every child, or place it right into a learning center. But what I want you to notice is this. What are some patterns that you can see in the words that we've got in this particular week worth of cards? So let's just take a look at them right now. We have words like Pam, Jan, Dan, and Mom. Those are proper nouns, aren't they? Yes. You also see some short A or short vowel sound words. Words like skip and ran. Those are all short vowel sounds as well. So not only do we have proper nouns with one syllable, but they also have a short vowel. Now we have one syllable, short vowel verbs, ran, skip. You can think of others, I'm sure. And then what are words like and? You've got, oh, I'm sorry, before we get to and, how about they and we? Pronouns, right? For Dan, Mom, Jan, and Pam. And then finally, the word and. That's a conjunction. It's going to join some sentences. So let's think about this a little bit. As students are practicing this, we can also begin to point out these more sophisticated kinds of learning so that they can start to put these kinds of cards together in their own sentences. So let's take a look at how you might utilize these cards, not only when you're teaching certain aspects of language, but what about this? How about we take these word cards and we kind of mix them up and we create new sentences? Mom and Jan skip. Pam and Dan ran. We skip. They ran. So these word cards are really important for kids to be able to practice putting together sentences in many, many different ways. In addition to the word cards, you also have punctuation cards, so that you want to make sure that you copy the comma, the period, the exclamation point, and the question mark, so that when students are creating these kinds of sentences in your learning centers, they can use those as well. Now, what I really think is exciting about this is that you can begin to add your own cards to the mix. So let's think about your independent reading. So when students are reading independently and they come upon a word that is a short vowel word, maybe that's a word card that you want to add to this particular pack. So every time you're reading with students or they're doing some of their individual work, you can begin to add those simple word cards. Once again, we've given you a series of blank cards for you to photocopy, and then you can always add that to this pack. So let's say we want to look at the verbs and we want short vowel verbs. Can you type in some other short vowel verbs that you might locate in books that you're reading? What are some other short vowel verbs? Excellent. We hop, run, sat. What else? Jump, trot, hit. You got it. So always thinking in terms of how can I take this beyond just this very simple exercise, this 10-minute a day exercise that I absolutely want to keep consistent, and now have kids practice this in different ways. What about adding words that come from a science or from a social studies content? So remember, this is not just in reading class or when you're doing your 10-minute a day writing work, but rather this is something that you can start to think about across your day. And kids will start to point that out to you as well. Anytime you're reading, we're pulling out those kinds of words, particularly words that you want to focus on. So pronouns, if you're going to focus on pronouns, begin to point those out to students, pull those word cards. So you can add your own cards to the mix. And then there's one more way that I want you to think about these learning centers and just sort of thinking about it. What is your classroom setup? So some of you are set up in learning centers. Some of you have individual word cards and word banks that you want to use with kids. Some of you use a chart just like this. So what I want you to see is this, that the teacher is going to model. The model sentence here in this particular photo is, I went to the garden. The teacher underlined I with red, went to the garden is our predicate, and so it is underlined in green. So now she's asked the children to do the same. They're creating their own original sentences. I went to the barn, I went to the pen, based upon maybe the theme of the farm. And of course, if you look up at the top, all the little word cards are up there as well. So students may use those word cards in addition to the sentence strips. So they can create some sentences using those word cards. We make sure that we have punctuation cards there as well. So that's just sort of another creative way that you can use this particular resource. So before I send it off to Kathy, are there any questions about anything that is confusing to you? How do I use this beyond just the 10 minutes a day? Where do kids write? That kind of thing. So if you have any questions at all, make sure that you let us know. All right, Kath.
So thanks, Di. I want to now take a look at just a couple of sample lessons, because what I want you to see within these lessons is that we can begin to pull and utilize not just the sentence a day, but also lessons that are in either your K1 Getting Ready to Write guide or your narrative or expository informational second grade guides. So if you take a look here at this particular lesson, this is week 19 in second grade called The Cave. And so again, notice at the top, you have all of your words for the week. Again, those are printable on cards. And so day one, the teacher reads this short little scenario. It ends with the question, and that sentence that's very predictable is written. We shouldn't go in, Jake thought. Day two, they read again, and then this predictable sentence, I couldn't see, Emily thought. And so what you'll notice here is that the sentences are similar, but think of the skills that we're working on in this particular week. One of those skills is pronouns. You notice we and I and he. The other skill that they're working on is contractions. So shouldn't, couldn't, wouldn't. And then on Friday, then it's their day to express themselves in their own sentence. So the little scenario, the story is read at the end of the week, and then the teacher waits and asks and lets the students write on their own. So let's look at this particular sample for this week 19, the cave. It says, we should go in the cave, but we couldn't see a thing. It looks scary inside the dark cave. I wonder what is in the dark hole, thought Jake. Here we go. So again, they're taking bits and pieces of their contractions, their pronouns, and the theme of the week, and they're combining it into their own particular little scenario or sentences. And then their picture goes along with this. So I want to just remind you of the connection between our sentence a day and the resources that you have available to you. In the beginning of your sentence a day, it's really based on the mechanics of writing, the capitalization, the punctuation, those predictable word patterns. But as you go through the year, we begin to then look at ways to incorporate and utilize the generative writing skills that are found in your getting ready to write guide or your informational narrative guide. And so I'm going to show you a few of those ideas on the next slide, but I want you to look at the bottom. It says connections, differentiation, extensions, applications, and creativity. So you want to connect the two resources between your sentence a day and your guide, your generative writing guides. Plus, it's great opportunities to differentiate with your students. So you can, as you're looking at particular skills, you can differentiate that skill depending on, do I have students who are some of my special ed kids, I need to slow that down a bit. I need to just expect those minimal sentences. But I have some GT students who, you know what, I can really bring in a thought or an idea or a skill from their getting ready to write guide or their informational narrative guides, and we're going to add that to their sentence. And then extensions, you can always add extensions to any of these lessons. But that Friday piece is really those students applying that particular skill. And then also notice, even on the one that I showed you, how creative that student took that picture and some of the ideas of the week and really made that their own. So they're very creative in their approach. So it's very systematic, daily, day by day, but on Friday, they really take those ideas and make them their own and get very creative with their thought processes on that Friday free-for-all. So I'm going to show you a couple of examples. So one of the lessons is in week 21. And if you go through these lessons as they're intended, week 21 is around Valentine's. So it's about Be My Valentine. And what you notice here in day 1 and day 2 and day 3 is that Jill felt excited and Rob felt embarrassed, which is really typical, right? Between a girl and a boy, how they feel at Valentine's. Girls are all about Valentine's, right? Boys, sometimes they're a little bit embarrassed about Valentine's card and that emotion of that comes with Valentine's. But I want you to think about this aspect. So in the getting ready to write guides and in your narrative guide for second grade, one of the skills that we teach is about what do feelings look like. And so what does excited look like? Oh, well, I jumped up and down and I threw my hands in the air and I was grinning from ear to ear. What does excited look like? What does embarrassed look like? Well, your shoulders are slumped and your head is down and your eyes are darting around because you're so embarrassed. What does embarrassed look like? So it's a great time to make the connection between here on this Valentine Day, the sample in week 21, we're really just stating they were sad, they were excited, they were embarrassed, then they were happy. But what do those feelings look like? So a great time to make that connection with that skill that's taught in your generative writing guides. Another one that I think is really a great week that you can add some of your generative writing skills is week 25. It's all about leprechauns. And so if you look at the words at the top and you go through the little story scenarios and you look at their predictable sentences, what word comes up often is leprechaun. So we have a skill called word reference, which is really taking that keyword leprechaun and adding an adjective and a noun to create what we call a word reference. So instead of leprechaun, 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 we might call him a green man, an Irish sprite. So in the chat box, I want to see what you can do with leprechaun. So I want you to add, I want an adjective and a noun because a word reference has both adjective and noun. Just chat out a few ideas for a word reference for leprechaun. Green man, Irish sprite are two that are on the screen. What else could you call a leprechaun? A tiny fellow, good job. A small guy, mischievous creature, tiny troublemaker, little lad, green trickster. Awesome, guys. Yes. A magical elf, gold hoarder. The one I always love that sometimes the kids will give me is a rainbow. They want to do something with rainbows. So we've always said he's a rainbow chaser. Okay. So again, you can connect. This is really making that connection between what are the skills in my guide that I'm teaching my kids, and how do I connect those with this sentence a day? It really makes the sentence a day come to life for the students. And again, you can differentiate those because sometimes kids are ready, sometimes they are not. The last one that I want to show you here is week 10. So this one was at the zoo. And it was really, in this particular one, it's just what happens at the zoo. So notice to the side that they were looking, and that's the word that you see in the word bank is look. But what if we added a more vivid verb to the word look? So maybe instead of look, we peered at the animals. We stared at the animals. We gazed at the different animals that are at the zoo. One more time in the chat box, give me some other verbs, some more vivid verbs for the word look. Observed, gazed, ogled. Ooh, I love it. Glared, gawked. That's a great one. Searched is another good one. Good job. Peeked. That's good. Noticed. Oftentimes as you look in your generative guide, we use sentence starters, and noticed and peered will be ways that we use these particular vivid verbs within our sentence starters, because it gives the students a way to frame up their sentences, because so often what do their sentences look like? They're exactly, oh, I see spied that came up. They're exactly the same. So we add those sentence starters then to their generative writing time so that they can frame up their sentence in a different way besides being very redundant. Okay. And again, through all three of these, you see how we're taking the skill within the within the sentence a day guide and connecting it to skills that are based in their generative writing guides. So great way to add to the sentence a day. And these are sprinkled within. Sometimes they're even looking at word reference within the week. Sometimes you can add those as the teacher. Yes, Valerie said sentence starters are amazing. Valerie, I totally agree, because it really helps our students to frame up their thoughts, because oftentimes their thoughts are exactly the same over and over and over, but it gives them the opportunity to write that sentence in a different way. It takes away that redundancy of their language. Right. So yes, thank you, Valerie.
So Kath, one of the things that I think we should try to show them is how those sentence starters work a little bit. And one way to do that is to showcase one of our lessons of the month. And if you don't mind stopping your share, I want to take everyone into one of our lessons of the month. And I'm going to just share my screen with you so that you can see that. So here's what you're looking at. You're basically looking at a series of Google slides. And what we love about our lessons of the month that you can sign up for on our website is that we create a series of lessons for you that are really sort of beyond any of the resources, but it includes a skill from the resource, sentence starters, and it gets kids writing either on paper and or on these slides so they can type as well. And that's certainly your choice. So this particular lesson of the month, and this is our February lesson of the month. Some of you might have received it today. Our February lesson of the month is called 10 Things I Love About You. This is for our K&1 audience. There is a different one for 2nd through 4th grade. And then we even have another one for our 5th through 8th grade students. But this is 10 Things I Love About You. And what we always do is we give a literature connection. So we have students listen to the story, and this is all about the pig and the little bunny rabbit. And what happens in the story is the pig and the bunny are writing love messages to each other. And so they have this little list. What I love about it is that you can literally begin to make that connection. How does pig write a sentence? Does pig use a capital letter? Does pig use a period? And that's another way, once again, always bringing it back to not only am I going to do that as a writer, I'm going to model it as your teacher, you're going to practice it, but look at what real authors do. And so that's another way to just reinforce this. And then as we move through, think about the skill is instead of adjectives that are very general, like nice, kind, or fun, what did pig and rabbit do? Well, I love pig because he is very pink, because he knows how to keep busy. So what do we call that? It's the show, don't tell. And look how pig showed rabbit why he loved him. I love rabbit because he always drops by, because he leaves when I am busy, because he is not afraid to ask for help. Once again, lots of ways that you can begin to really reinforce this with your students. And then we shared all about the sentence starters. And so here's what I want you to see is that we always offer sentence starters, and you'll find that in our main guides, either you're getting ready to write or your genre specific guides for grade 2. But we also do it in all of the lessons that we share with you, because sentence starters help students to frame up their thoughts. And that's really what this is. So students learn how to create full sentences. We begin with the capital letter, we end with some punctuation. And in this particular instance, the 10 Things I Love About You, there's a series of slides for kindergarten, and then some that are just a little bit more sophisticated for our 1st grade students. And here's where some of our sentence starters are going to happen. So instead of writing simple sentences, now we can rewrite sentences using that sentence starter. So I truly admire because, or about. It is amazing that it's hard to miss. My favorite quality is. So these are ways that we can go beyond just simple sentences. And of course, we ask students to move through these slides. They can do the writing right on the slides. But to be honest with you, I love pencil to paper. And that's really what the sentence a day is all about, putting the pencil to the paper. For kids who need to learn how to write sentences, that's a critical skill. Daya, you want to add anything else? Anyone else want to add some, I'm going to stop my share now. Anyone else?
Actually, I'd love to jump in right there, Di. Thank you. A couple of things that I want you to keep in mind that is always true with empowering writers. Because we have common language and assured experiences, and because we're building these sentences a day, what you're doing is you're establishing expectations. You know what you've taught directly. And by doing this in a very consistent manner, what it allows you to do is to hold students accountable for what they know, as opposed to how often we would walk around the classroom. I know in my own classroom when I would do editing and revising work back in the day when I had no specific curriculum for it, I taught it, and I used to say on an as-need basis. If nobody knows how to capitalize, I taught everybody how to capitalize that day. And then another time kids are struggling with quotations, I'd work on that. But there was never a consistent approach in terms of what that looked like. And then what would happen is you'd mix these kids up, send them on to the next grade level, and I sent them with no assured experiences. So when we think about a sentence a day and what we're building here, we're building consistency, we're building the common language, it establishes our expectations for students. And it circles back to a question that somebody had asked. I think they might have just asked me was where should I start? Here I am in second grade. I have the guide now. What should I do right now? And our first desire really is just to pick up, like, okay, I'm going to jump right in. But what I want you to really think about is to look at the resource and see all the skills that come before. Because if in fact your students are ready to begin where you would be normally at this time of year, then I would have no objection to that. But chances are that the skill work that happened prior to now needs to happen. So if you're picking up this guide, listen, there's nothing wrong with starting in week 1 now. If that's where you are and that's where you want to dive in, and it's okay, because there's always a point at which we start, right? And as we get our feet wet and have a better understanding of the resource, that it's understandable that teachers would ask those questions. The other thing that I want you to all keep in mind is that, because when we talk about spelling and we talk about letter formation and we talk about where our students are on that continuum, we make the assumption that that's happening on a parallel track. We're not teaching students how to form letters in this particular guide. You're doing that work when you're working with students on handwriting and on those particular skills. What we're really doing is we're building the foundation for what happens in writing. And that's why these conversations are so important to have. And keep in mind is as our students get a little bit more sophisticated, and it doesn't take long in these guides for them to have little passages, that it is easy to pick up what's the genre. I have characters. I have animals talking. This must be a narrative. The author must have written the story to entertain me. By these sentences that I see right here, and see, Kathy has the narrative cards so that we're reminding them about genre. So as we go through the year, we're always circling back to that foundational work that is so important, because as we teach kids to write sentences, we're also teaching kids to start to read strategically, even though they can't yet. So that's why all of this conversation that we talk about is so important. One of the reasons why we wanted to host this particular webinar today is because there's always a lot of questions that come up about how do I use this? How should I be using this in my classroom? And we really want to emphasize that this kicks off your day and it goes throughout your day. And so at this point, anybody on my team want to jump in, add anything else to what we said, or anybody have any questions they'd like to ask?
So Kath, I know that last slide. I know there's a lot of you out there that actually don't use the resource or you don't have it. Just so you know that the Sentence a Day resource is only in the printed version. There is no digital version. All of our genre guides, our editing and revising guides for grades 3 and 4 are all in a digital format. Sentence a Day right now is just in a printed format. And so if you're interested, if you kind of like what you saw, the best way to go and find it is to go and look on our bookstore, and you can check that out, those products out. There's a QR code. If you hold your camera up to it, you'll go right to it on your phone, or you can just grab the URL down there, and maybe Jen, maybe one of us can pop that in there for in our chat box so that everyone can grab it.
So somebody asked the question, if my district had purchased the hub, would they have also received Sentence a Day program? They would not have, because the Sentence a Day is not digital. We don't have them digitally yet. It's a constant discussion that we have, but I want our kids to write. And I'm afraid that if we make them digital, then we're going to lose the whole point of this. I'm a firm believer that there is a whole lot that happens between your hand and your brain that needs to happen on paper. And the other part, when Jennifer went through the strategies of the dotting and the color coding and the teacher walking around the room, a lot of that needs to happen on paper. And it's also extremely helpful for teachers when kids are color coding. We can scan a room very quickly and see who's with me, who needs more support. So until someone can write a really powerful, persuasive essay as to why we should be having this all digital, we're just not convinced yet that that's the way to go for these little guys.